That's King Solomon. So King Solomon is known for his wisdom, but King Solomon is also remembered for his colossal folly, his falling into sin, despite the depth and the breadth of his godly wisdom. And just like his father David before him, Solomon's most famous folly involved women. David's sins multiplied around the life of a single woman, Bathsheba. But Solomon's concerned 1,000. That's right. We read in 1 Kings 11 that Solomon had at least 700 wives and 300 concubines. In my estimation, that was likely 999 too many. You see, collecting wives was something that God had expressly forbid of Israel's kings, all the way back in Deuteronomy 17. And according to 1 Kings, that wasn't all. What really compounded Solomon's sin was that these were foreign wives. We read this in 1 Kings. King Solomon loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. His wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Solomon built a high place for Shemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. What's up with that? This is Solomon. How is it that a person like Solomon, whom the Bible says was given a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore, how is it that he could fall into such obvious sin? What was he thinking anyway? Well, if you look at Solomon's life, it turns out that his folly with foreign wives wasn't exactly his first mistake. For example, did you ever notice that Solomon spent about twice as long building his own royal palace than he did building God's temple? Most of us, when we read those long lists of all of Solomon's possessions in 1 Kings, take them as signs of his greatness. For example, we read that Solomon had 12,000 horses. And that sounds pretty impressive until we remember that, again, back in Deuteronomy, God expressly forbid Israel's kings to accumulate horses. Well, it seems that King Solomon, despite all this supernatural wisdom that God gave him, really wasn't so different than we are. He knew what he was supposed to do. He knew what he wasn't supposed to do. He knew what the consequences would be. But he acted as if he didn't believe all the things that God revealed to him. Well, these days we don't have King Solomon to consult. But we have no shortage of business consultants and personal coaches and television personalities. A few years back, one of the trendy consulting fads was to look at something called the knowing-doing gap. The knowing-doing gap. It suggests that we spend way too much time and energy on knowing things, and somehow we never get around to doing the things that we know. In fact, businesses, churches hire consultants over and over again to give them the same analysis year after year, never able to take that analysis and translate it into practice. It's sort of like reading the Bible, all the way through the Bible in a year, but then never taking time during that year to feed the hungry or to serve the poor. Well, this morning we're going to look at just a few examples of the things that we as Christians know that we should or we shouldn't be doing, and what we might do about this knowing-doing problem that we have. Well, let's start with something we know we should be doing, but by and large, we are not doing. I know a lot of you like to whine or otherwise lament when Pastor Mark and I teach about stewardship. But you know, we wouldn't be doing that if stewardship wasn't a central part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And we wouldn't be preaching about it if every Christian already had all the disciplines and attitudes about stewardship mastered. The Proverbs tell us things about stewardship like this: those who are generous are blessed, for they share their bread with the poor. Whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but the one who turns a blind eye will get many a curse. That's not surprising, right? How many of you today are surprised by those Proverbs, as if you had never known before that God wanted us to give to the poor? All the biblical teachings, the examples of Jesus and the apostles, the examples that Pastor Mark and I and other church leaders set in giving at least 10% of our annual incomes to God's work through the church, all those things point to one basic principle of Christian giving. Generous giving starts at 10%, but actually involves something much, much more radical, a radical transformation of the heart that recognizes that all that stuff that we hold on to belongs to God and not us. We know this. Why is it then that giving by United Methodists averages less than 2% of our annual incomes? Why is it that all of us, even those of us who tithe, struggle from time to time with the feeling that if we give our stuff back to God's work, somehow in the end God is going to leave us short? There is a massive knowing-doing gap in the way we live out our stewardship. Now let's look at something we do, but we know we shouldn't be doing. The Proverbs give us ample warning about drinking too much. Wine is a mocker and a beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. And we read this: do not join those who drink too much or gorge themselves on meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags. But here's my favorite, absolute favorite, proverb about drinking. In the 23rd chapter of Proverbs, who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights, and your mind imagine confusing things. You'll be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on top of the rigging. Can you imagine that? They hit me, you will say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me, but I don't feel it. When will I wake up so I can find another drink?